Hi, I'm David from EV World News. We're talking about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. I'm excited today to have a special guest with me. I have Rue Phillips from SkillFusion, who's going to talk about some different things going on in the EV charging sector. Rue, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, David. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's always fun to have guests. So where are you based at now?
Our headquarters is in Detroit.
Okay.
Uh, right now, I'm on the West Coast. We have an office on the West Coast here in sunny Seal Beach, California.
Oh, nice, nice, nice. You don't sound like you're from Detroit, though. Where are you from originally?
I'm from the UK. I came
Okay.
to the US in 1986, so been here quite a while. Still got the accent though.
Yeah, you still got a trace of an accent. Yeah, I can tell it's from somewhere that it's not the US, and I knew it was somewhere in the Commonwealth, but I didn't know exactly where that might be. So,
Yeah, I'm the one with the funny accent in the company.
yeah. So my understanding from looking at SkillFusion website is you guys do things in the training people to work on electric vehicle charging stations and infrastructure, correct?
Correct. SkillFusion is it's a software company, a digital platform, and we address the critical components in our EV industry, like the shortage of labor. What we're doing is creating a forum, a database of ready-to-work individuals that have a variation of skill sets to actually address one of the big problems that we've got right now.
Great. Well,
Shortage.
we'll get into that shortage in a little bit. Let's first off, so we're going to talk mainly things related to public charging stations, right?
That's right.
And so the Biden administration, through the Inflation Reduction Act, approved all this money for all these charging stations to go out there, and it's struggling to really get going. Can you tell me a little bit of what your thoughts on that are?
Actually, it is pathetic. In the news today that seven charging stations have been implemented from the 2021 bill that we're talking about here. Seven charging stations have been installed under a $7.5 billion incentive. Yes, now there's a lot of reasons for that. Socioeconomic disparities, policy, bureaucracy. Obviously, is the number one. We're all used to seeing that when it comes to the disbursement of public funds. But yes, we've got a serious problem, David, that we need to address.
So what do you think is the solution to getting this more charging stations out into the market?
Well, first off, it's education. Going back to where we Skill Fusion address that, but educating the public that there is going to be a future. This is going to happen. It's not just about climate change, by the way. Everyone thinks that if you drive an EV, you're a tree hugger. and and you wear straw hats on a weekend. So it's not the case. The large car manufacturers are tooling up. They're retooling for what is imminently going to be the future. So education is a big one. Um, the the workforce diversity is what we call DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to address the underprivileged areas. There's technology that we have to overcome. Pulling up to a station and it doesn't have the right connector. But there's a variation of things that we need to do to implement EV infrastructure. Education, number one.
One of the things I find fascinating is I don't think the average person has any clue how many public chargers there are out there already. I think there's something like 125,000 public charging stations or something like that in the United
That
States.
that's correct. Yes. Now there will be what we're looking at. There'll be millions of chargers, millions by 2030. So we got a lot of work to do. But
Wow.
yes,
I always wonder it's the one of the things that I think, and this isn't probably something that we normally would discuss, But outside of the Tesla network, I don't think any of the charging companies make money. And at some point, there has to be a critical mass where there's enough EV users using those charging stations enough that it's actually profitable for them. So a lot of people don't understand why the government needs to support this. And because the charging companies have to be able to get to a certain point where they can actually, turn a profit and provide this infrastructure just like we did with roads.
You're absolutely right. Uh, private investment has to look long term.
Mhm.
This is a long term solution. So when it comes to the profitability, what you're talking about, they're looking for the next 10 years. Not it's one of those, if we build it, they will come. It's also like building a gas station and implementing a gas station. You have to look at the future. It's a 10-year forecast. So I personally believe it will become a profitable market, implementing the electric vehicle infrastructure.
I've noticed, you're from the UK, that over in the UK, some places they really charge a lot at the charging station to try to make sure that they do make money. So I don't know that they have the same government backing for some of that to try to make it work like the US does.
No, you're absolutely right. It is a little costly in the UK. I actually right now there's a thing called the weights and measures, whereby kilowatt hours is going to be monitored, and I think it will actually come to fruition that it actually is going to be cheap to charge a car publicly.
So tell me what your DEI roadblock is.
DEI roadblocks are which, like for your public and your listeners out there, diversity, equity, and infusion is basically there's underprivileged areas where, like you say, it's not profitable for investors and developers to put charges. So we've got a roadblock there. We've got a lot to do. There's regulatory accountability, where the funds are going. There's obviously the cost of electric vehicles is going to come into that. Right now, and electric vehicles, the average price about $30,000. So affordability, um, and another one again is the implementation of the infrastructure. It's pretty difficult to implement infrastructure on areas where the utility, the equipment is not suffice. So there's upgrades, technology. There's a lot of reasons why DEI roadblocks are there.
Well, yeah, and like you said, there's we talk about bureaucracy with what's going on with the Biden's implementation of charging stations. And you touched on the issue of you need grid upgrades, and grid upgrades a lot of times they're in the same boat where there are power sources out there that applied to connect to the grid like in 2019 that are
Hmm.
5 years old and still haven't been connected to the grid because of bureaucratic issues and getting necessary permits, getting the different governments to cooperate with those projects and getting them online. Um, so it's interesting kind of to see how that'll play out because obviously it's tough. You got the chicken and the egg syndrome a lot of times with people adapting to EVs because if you're in a place where you don't have any access to chargers and you don't own the home, you live in an apartment complex, then you've definitely got an issue of where you're going to go charge the vehicle. And I think you do definitely see a lot of that in certain areas. You hit on the $30,000 thing on the cars. It's exciting to see some of the cars that are about to enter the U.S. market, like the VinFast VF3, which is going to be around $20,000. Tesla says they're bringing a $25,000 car next year. We'll see if that actually happens. Um, Even Ford thinks they can produce a $25,000 car. So, which is interesting because Ford isn't actually producing cars anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, they only make SUVs and trucks, and so they're going to go back into the car business again. It's because it wasn't profitable for them like trucks and SUVs, which I find quite, fascinating. But it's wild to see how this can happen. So, what do you think the fix is for a lot of this stuff on the federal level?
Overcoming the bureaucracy. It has to, that's the number one. Is what the local municipalities are actually doing with the funds. So the roadblock there. Another one, I know this might sound crazy, but I go back to that education. Local authorities, they're given the hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody, very few of them inside these municipalities know what's going on in the field. They get this pot of money and they says, oh, it's got to be distributed to EV infrastructure. Very few of them actually know about the technologies and understand it. Yeah, there's a lot of roadblocks that we have to overcome on a federal level
You know,
to make this work.
I consider myself to be some of an educator here in the EV space, and a lot of what you're saying is undeniably true because I have people all the time, I'll see posts that say things like EVs suck. And it's like, okay, well, what about them sucks? I mean, and what way are they inferior to a gas car? Or
Yeah, yeah.
I get these typical comments from people, and like, or that they all catch on fire. And it's like it's such a statistical anomaly that by miles driven, you have 1.5% the chance in an EV of catching on fire as you do in a gas car. And it's a 60 to 1 difference. And yet, yeah, but they had a fire in the UK. They had a fire in China. It's like, well, I see, gas cars that caught fire, not all the time, but I see them from time to time. I've never seen an EV fire. Okay,
No,
I've seen
I
lots of
personally.
videos of them. Yeah, I've never personally actually seen one. I've never had a car period catch on fire. So if my odds are 60 times greater that a gas car would catch on fire, you know, I'd be lucky if any of my relatives ever experienced an electric vehicle catching on fire, or unlucky, as the case may be. I'm just saying it's such a statistical anomaly, but so much of it is just education, and people hear all these things, and you know in the next 10 years, you're talking about how EV adoption are going. You got these 800-volt chargers coming to the market, and then you have to have cars that hit them. Current cars can't accept it, but we know that in 10 years, a large portion of the chargers out there that are superchargers are going to be 5-minute chargers to add 200 miles to a car. And,
Mhm.
that technology is already being installed both in cars and in charging stations. It's just there's hardly any of them that exist, and so it's but like you said, education is such a critical part because the average person has no clue that most people don't know about the how the tax credits work on buying an EV. The
Mhm.
dealerships aren't educating them. And this is one of the reasons why I think Tesla's had such a success versus the dealerships. Even the dealerships don't really seem to educate the salespeople on how to sell an electric car, and it should be with the $7,500 tax credit as a down payment. You'd think that would be the number one thing you'd lead off with.
Absolutely. My wife, actually, I wanted to point this out. Like, used EV car sales are up. They
Unbelievably.
absolutely. I think it's something like 20-30% growth year over year. But my wife just went and purchased a used BMW i3, and the salesman in the dealership knew nothing, as you say, knew nothing about EVs. When it came to the chargers, public infrastructure, he says, I don't know anything about this. This is a nice car, but I can't tell you anything about it. And it was like, it was incredible. It was a beautiful car, by the way, really reliable. Yes,
When did you get that car?
about 6 months ago.
Did you so you were you able to get the $4,000 tax credit because it was a plug-in hybrid?
That no, it's full electric. This is a BEV.
Oh, yours is the full electric one. Okay,
That's
so does
right.
it,
Yes. Yeah.
okay, so what is the range just 80 miles?
No, it's a hundred and I think there's 140, 150
Oh,
on it.
nice,
Yeah.
nice. Okay. So one of my tennis friends here in Omaha, Nebraska, refuses to fly on an airplane. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And he drives a BMW i3. He drives one of the ones that has the 80-mile battery plus the 2 gallons of fuel with a generator.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
He's driven it from Omaha at least a couple times and met me at tournaments in Phoenix and in Orlando and driven there and back. And his adventures, I was like, why aren't you videoing this and YouTubing this? It's such a crazy experience. You have the most unique BMW i3 driving experience of anyone. I mean, he'll take these 1,500-mile trips there and 1,500 miles back in the BMW i3 that only has an 80-mile electric range.
That is incredible. You know what's interesting is the average distance for an EV driver, the average commuter, is
Mhm.
30 miles a day.
Right.
30 miles a day. Now we have two EVs. I have one with a range of 300 miles, and we have the local commuter with about 140. But we rarely, we charge both cars once a week.
Mhm.
I actually never use public infrastructure. There's no need to. Um, 70% of, as you know, these figures, David, 70% of EV charging will be done at home.
Right. It's a huge difference, but at the same time, the early adopters all own houses and they have a
Yes.
garage, they have a place to use it. There's a couple of things, I look at EV statistics in the United States versus the EU. In the EU, the average electric vehicle buyer owns 1.5 cars. So that there's
Mhm.
a 50% chance that besides that EV, they also have either a hybrid or gas car. Okay.
Yes.
In the United States, though, the average EV buyer owns 2.5 cars. Now, I know people that own three EVs. Okay.
Yes.
But the most common is we own one EV and we own one or two other gas vehicles in our household. Okay.
Yes.
And so, but at the same time, the early adopters mostly have access. I think most of your trade-ins are people who didn't have access to good charging infrastructure. Like they didn't have it at home, they didn't have, access. But I know people that build apartments, and everybody that's building apartments is adding EV infrastructure into their properties. One of the problems you get though is if you have too many level 2 chargers, you have to change the transformers.
Now, let's talk about that because the new
Mhm.
technologies that are out there by the big companies like Schneider,
Mhm.
Eaton, they're coming up with technologies where you could put four, six, maybe even 10 level two chargers without upgrading the infrastructure by using smart energy management systems. For example, if we pull up in our EV and we're one of 10 vehicles and I've got 50% charge, I don't need that energy for the full 8 to 10 hours while I'm in bed. So what they'll do is they'll look at each vehicle and say, "Ha car number three needs a full charge. Car number two needs a 20% charge." In addition to that, it's going to look at the load from the existing infrastructure, and it won't let the vehicles like trip the breakers. It will shut the chargers off according to the demand. It's really smart energy management.
It's a
That's being
nice load
implemented
balancing
now.
system. That's a nice,
Indeed.
yeah. I've seen some stuff. So I had the owner of a company called Emporia Energy on it, and they make EV chargers. They sell a lot of them on Amazon, but they make home chargers. So they make level
Hmm.
1 and 2 chargers, and they also make energy management systems for the house. And a lot of it is to help you manage both your solar and your EV and how you are both operating and having excess wasted energy in the house
Yes.
and only optimally charging the car when needed and trying to sell the energy in the car plus your solar to the grid when you can get the most money for it and then buy it back when um, it's cheapest.
I'm a big fan of bidirectional technologies,
Yeah,
David, which is what you're talking about.
right.
Add to that battery energy storage, and you have the perfect microgrid where you're creating solar in the daytime, charging your batteries, and the vehicle fully integrated at the same time. Big fan. It's a lot of the vehicle manufacturers are looking into that. Nissan, their Leaf was one of the first ones that
Mhm.
tried it on the pilot program. But yeah, bi-directional charging is coming.
So I've really only been this in this space for a couple of years. My regular co-host Bill, who um, couldn't make it today, has been in it for. I mean, he's been doing the EV world, like I said, for 26 years, but
Hmm.
he's been in the space for another 10 years before that. Okay, so he's seen everything. He's seen all the ugly ducklings of the EV space that were built in the 90s and stuff like that. I mean, I say all the time, one of the objects when these EVs first came out was to make them as hideous as possible so nobody would want to buy them. Okay, and if you look though at the car manufacturers, they you look at a GM or a Chrysler, whoever, you want your expensive cars to look amazing, right? Okay, so
Hmm.
people will pay a premium price for an amazing looking car, and they make the cheap cars look like crap. Well, they did that with EVs. So when Tesla came along and only sold EVs, they made all their now they only had one car to start with. I mean, they had the Roadster, and then they released the Model S. And the Model S is what really made electric cars cool to own. Okay, and the Model S looks amazing. There's no question when I still see them driving down the road how amazing I think they look. And then, but they've done a great job. And some people hate the way Teslas look, but
Hmm.
um, they didn't make them ugly. Okay. And all of a sudden they sold. And so now you see Ford, they've got the Mach E looks nice. It sells for them. You've got the Ford F-150 Lightning. It looks just like their F-150 pickup truck. So
That's right.
people aren't concerned about it. They're not selling ugly vehicles. The only bad thing is the Fords are expensive. And
Yes.
Teslas were initially expensive and they're starting to be um, more reasonable. But then you look at an outlier like Hyundai Kia, and Hyundai Kia is starting to introduce that the Kona is about to be sold in the U.S. for about 27,000. And and Hyundai have opened up a manufacturing plant in Georgia that's going to make 300,000 cars a year, and they're not making ugly EVs. They used to make ugly cars. I used to
Yes.
just hate the way Kias and Hyundais looked, but their new ones look really nice. And they hired somebody, I can't remember if they came from Audi or BMW, somebody like that, that came over as that was styling the cars at one of the German manufacturers and now does that for them. And so they changed the way they look, and it suits the American audience much better. And so once you start getting the nicer looking vehicles, and outside of Tesla, you can't mistake a Tesla coming down the road. You may not know what model it is, but
That's right.
they've all got a unique look compared to other cars. But that being said, when it comes to most of the other brands, like I see Nissan Arias driving down the road, um, they look just like a Pathfinder. Essentially, it's just
Hmm.
you can only tell because of the smooth front. And so many of the EVs, the only difference is the fact that there's a flat front and not a grill on the front. And
Yeah,
other
I'm
tell.
I'm biased. I'm biased because we have two electric vehicles.
Hmm.
I drive a Mercedes EQS,
Hmm.
which you couldn't tell if it was an electric vehicle at all. Myself and my wife, we drive on the California freeways and we look for EVs. Funny story, I was installing, like Bill, installing electric vehicle chargers since 1995 here in California,
Oh wow!
and back then EVs obviously weren't popular. I had the GM EV1, and
And it was hideous.
yes, it was. It was fast, really, really fast. But I remember saying to myself, when I was driving down the freeway in 1995, saying, one day I'm going to look around and I'm going to see at least one or two electric vehicles within my plane of sight.
Mhm.
Now I can look around on the freeway and you can count three electric vehicles. You have to look for them because, like you
Right.
said, they got stickers on the side, clean air vehicle that can drive in the fast
Eh,
lane. But
yeah, and the HO and the hover, I call it the hover lane.
there you go. Yes, but
Yeah, you know,
they're getting more popular, and as you say, the designs are becoming, the pleasing to say.
if I weren't in this space, and the same for you, if you weren't in this space, you probably wouldn't recognize all the EVs going down the road. I look at so many as I look at the news articles and see the announcements from the manufacturers. It's like when I see one, it's like, oh, I just saw that. I mean, where we live in Omaha, there aren't a whole lot of EVs. It's not like
Yes,
being in LA where there are a lot of EVs. What was it? Almost 25% of car sales in California last year were EVs. I mean, it was a big percentage of new car sales in that state, whereas here it's still like 1 or 2%. So it's very different.
I wanted to point out and go back to that the problem that we spoke about. Only seven charging stations on the $7.5 billion incentive that's
Mhm.
out there. So
Yes.
what we're going to see within the next 2 years is when that money starts to filter down, and we get our act together on how it's spent and where it should go. I think you're going to see a vast difference in public awareness because there'll be more EV chargers out there. But once it starts filtering through, and like you say, it's pathetic right now that all this money out there, we don't have public chargers, and so there is a solution to it. We are looking forward, to a positive outcome. David, really believe that.
So I want you to tell me a little bit about your certification work. 'Cause it looks like you have programs for both electricians and non-electricians.
That's correct. So when a charging station goes down, one of the major causes for problems is communications and networking. Now, presently, everyone thinks that you have to have 8,000 hours, 4 years of training to be a journeyman electrician before you can send someone out there to flip a breaker or to fix a communication problem on the EV charger. So what SkillFusion has done, we address a variation of skill sets. So you send the right guy for the right job when things go down on a station or a EVSE.
Well, one of the big things that I tell people all the time, they're thinking about getting their first EV, and I generally tell them, look, you really can't go wrong getting a Tesla because you won't have the disappointment that everybody else faces when they go charge their car. And you and I both know what that is. It's 20% of all non-Tesla charging attempts in the US result in the inability to actually charge your car.
Correct.
And in some parts of the country, it's really bad. I think it's mainly in South Florida, where it's like 33%, and then there's some places that are really good in the Midwest. But I think in the Midwest, maybe people aren't tearing up the chargers, and in
Yeah.
Florida, maybe they are. And so this is the big thing is I don't know that people who don't own an EV, it's kind of funny because I hear all these arguments, oh, the catch on fire list. Like, if you really knew what was up, it's the fact that the chargers fail all the time. And so it's an interesting point. I saw an estimate. I can't remember what the number was, but it was a huge number of people are needed for servicing charging. Do you have an idea what that number is?
80,000 per year. We are going to need 80,000 electricians in order to meet the forecasted 2030 milestones.
What about the
Uh,
non-electricians that, like you said, like
Non-electricians, that's where SkillFusion is going to be coming in for the operations and maintenance. You just mentioned the 25% of chance when you pull up to a charging station, the 25% is not going to be working. A lot of that is because there's no operations, maintenance, and service repair protocols set in place. Everybody wants to go and install these charging stations and make money in the process, but very few people are looking at that afterlife of the systems. Like you said, Bill is probably privy to a lot of the legacy stations that have been out there since the early 2000s that are not working. Yes, we've got a lot of work to do to change the strategy on how we maintain them once they've been installed, David.
Um, so what do you think the opportunities are for non-electricians in this space? So if they
Uh,
go through the certification, what do you think the opportunity is for them?
Oh, it's going to be fantastic. It really is. As far as being able to sign on to work ready digital platforms like ours, like a Uber S model, where
Mhm.
these smart devices talk to the cloud and they're going to say, I have problem XY24Z, which means the change of the RFID cards inside the unit, or flip a breaker, or change the antenna, or a number of things where non-electricians are going to be required to go out there. They'll know before they go of which skill set is going to be required. That's where SkillFusion, we come in with our micro tracks. It's kind of like a DNA matching. When someone wants to come into the EV world, so to speak, and they say, I don't want to be an electrician, but I do want to be able to service the infrastructure, kind of like the Geek Squad,
Right.
kind of like
What
yeah.
kind of level of income of jobs would you expect those to be for the non-electricians?
I think it varies. Obviously from state to state, we've looked at even if you're a qualified electrician, I hear the numbers of six-figure numbers where a journeyman electrician are earning money. But yeah, the data is going to vary on that, David. But it's a healthy standard of living. It really is. If think about this, the value of that charger that's going down, the losses to the owner or the host, what they would pay for someone to come and actually fix it. So it's going to be down. And also, let's look at the 97% uptime guarantees which have been implemented. Are you familiar
What,
with that, David?
I have not, but that's interesting because I know like with Tesla, they have less than a 2% fail rate when people go to charge. Okay.
Yes.
But everybody else is in a different universe. This
Oh my
97%
gosh.
thing, who's implementing this? Is this an attempted legislation, or this just like some of the companies are trying to put up a guarantee? How is that working?
It's a federal legislation that basically says if you want to access this funding, then your infrastructure has to be at 97% availability. As you said, Tesla is up there at 98. I was doing solar back in the day when I morphed from EVs to solar, which is another story. Who killed the electric car here in California?
Mm.
But in solar, we were up in the 99% availability. So again, smart technology. Um, so yeah, we are going to be seeing some changes. How they police that, that's going to be a tough one. Um, yeah, but they're already it's implemented within the budgets, uh, and also operations and maintenance. What I spoke about is that's being mentioned also in the bills.
Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, is some of this money that NEVI, I see the NEVI thing with chargers all the time, the NEVI.
Yeah,
Is that
National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure funding.
now
Yes.
is that specific to certain highways?
No, it isn't. Obviously, underprivileged areas are
Mhm.
going to be focused in that also, but it's not just the highways. You'll be seeing it, on all types of communities. What I'm seeing here is that here in California, we were early adopters of the EV. Um, it's literally like every 5 mile is the target on a highway where they want to have access to EV chargers. As I drive around California, there's a map in my car that says you're just passing an EV charger, just like we have on the gas stations.
Right,
Um, and I don't see. I took a trip about a year ago in my EV from Los Angeles to Phoenix, Arizona, and I could just do it with the mileage without a charge, but I didn't want to risk it, so I
right.
stopped. Uh, and the 10 freeway is a long freeway, but there were charges along the way. I didn't get range anxiety when I did the trip.
That's good. That's good. Well, like I'm telling you, my friend who's gone cross country in the
Yes.
BMW i3, we did a video about that. I mean, it was so crazy that a guy, I hear people say, "Well, you can't go anywhere. It's just local." It's like he truly owns a local commuter EV, and he took it cross country,
Oh
and
my
he
gosh,
he
that's
was at all kinds of charging stations. He was at level 2. I wouldn't be surprised if he was charging at a level 1 station somewhere, just plugged into electricity, but,
yes.
um, sometimes we wouldn't hear from him for hours wondering where he's at because it got to be a game as asking where this guy was at. And, a lot of times he was meeting interesting people at the charging stations because he was hanging out there for so long. And some of these were really just ones on the side of people's businesses where they were letting people charge for free and you know, just, it wasn't like they weren't all superchargers, that was for sure, because to put 80 miles of range into a battery wouldn't take that long.
Well,
Not on a supercharger.
you could do a whole show on your friend with that experience.
No, I
That
know.
would be a good one.
I know. It's so unique. And anyways, so what do you think the future of charging stations is right now?
I think the elimination of range anxiety being number one. So putting more stations in is going to be imminent. That's going to be the future. You will see an EV charger in your community. Every 5 to 10 miles. I see education implementation in schools, colleges. Um, I see when you go to a car rental place that they will not only know about the vehicle, but they'll be able to tell you about the where the charging stations are. Um, but adoption, public awareness, I think is another one. What you're laughing?
I've got a funny experience for you telling me you're driving an EQS. So I went somewhere and I needed a rental car, and they give me a
Mhm.
Mercedes, and I can't figure out any of the controls. And so I ask for help. Nobody that works there knows how to figure any of them out either. So I had them give me a different car because I couldn't figure out how to connect my phone. I couldn't figure out how to operate the radio. There was a whole bunch of things. I could figure out how to turn on the gas and drive down the road, but that was about it. But any of
You're
the other
right.
stuff, it was so complicated. And I'm sitting there thinking it's like people talk about their bad experiences renting an EV at a car rental place, and it's like, you know, the big thing is being hooked up to the right apps so you can go fill it up. Okay,
Yes.
because it's not like just going to a gas station where you just stick your card in. You have an app that allows you to connect to that charging
That's
network.
that's changed. They've changed that. The legislations have said you should be able to pull up at the charging station and pay with the credit card.
Oh, nice,
So
nice. That, that
yeah,
that'll
yeah.
that'll be an improvement. But you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of things that just are a challenge for somebody who doesn't necessarily know what they're doing. And
Indeed.
and so it didn't go well for Hertz. They had issues with it, and I think that there it like you're saying, education is such a big part of this, and I see so many things that people talk about, like all the child labor in the Congo that's being used to extract
Make the
cobalt, and
batteries.
it's like,
Mhm.
well, you mean the cobalt being used in your iPhone? or
Hmm.
but now the batteries are starting to get away from using cobalt,
Yes,
and
yes,
or
indeed.
the companies are making the suppliers certify that they're not using cobalt that's coming from child labor. And then again, I also have a different opinion. It's like, okay, so you're this child who's an orphan and you need money to eat, and they're letting you work, and they're
Mhm.
paying you, and so you can survive. Now they're going to kick you out because, you know, I'm just saying every well-intentioned law has some negative consequence, right? It always seems like there's
Absolutely.
something you don't think of, and it's like, okay, well, so the kid's going to starve to death because he now can't eat, you know. So,
You bring something up. It's always been a problem, the adoption to future technologies.
mhm.
You mentioned about when you rented the EQS. It is indeed like a spaceship. There's no knobs on there. It's a glass screen for your listeners, and you slide your finger and another screen comes up. So it's all touch screen. But when we first got into computers, we had the same problems. One of the number one error, I think it is, they did a study. The number one error of why you can't charge your car was user error. Did you know that?
that doesn't surprise
You
me.
Yeah, user error. In other words, they pushed the wrong button. They were doing something wrong, and the charger just wouldn't allow a charge.
Well, when you first get a Tesla, you hook up to the Tesla app and you get set up with it, and then every time you go, you stick the supercharger in your car, it recognizes your car and it bills you for using the supercharger, and it just fills it with electrons. And
Exactly.
the user experience is very simplistic compared to, having 8 different apps on your phone for using all the other networks.
Indeed. Yes.
And so it's just a different experience. Now the fact that Tesla is opening up their network to all kinds of other manufacturers, I think it is really quite, I I don't know, it's you look at it sometimes like Tesla's not giving up anything by doing that. If
Hmm.
anything, they're simply making their charging network more profitable for them.
Indeed.
And I think they already probably had figured out how to make money on it. They don't mark up that much. They mark up about 50% over the local utility rate is all,
But
which
yeah, initially it was free. If you recall, when you bought a Tesla, in this, in the early days, you got free charging. I think that bit Elon Musk a little bit in his pocket when he
yeah,
did that.
I have a friend who has like a 2020 model that has free charging,
Hmm.
and he's already at 150,000 miles on his 2020. He's been using it because he drives a lot of long distance highway trips, and
Hmm.
gets that free charging, and loves it. I mean, not many people drive as much as this guy, but that's you know that's a big plus. But I mean, in reality, EVs are so much cheaper to drive anyways. It's probably
Yes.
not you know that big of a deal. um
Yeah, talk about that. Cheaper to drive. EV is 3 cents a mile compared to 14 cents a mile for a gasoline car.
oh, there's no question.
Mhm.
Let's see here. I wanted to show your website while we were on here, and nice looking site. Oh, fusion of skill and opportunity, because your website is skillfusion.com.
That's correct.
And if somebody, and you got this big get in touch button up here in the corner, easy to find if somebody wants to reach out to you guys. And it's mostly though about skill development and how to get set up as for certifications for both an electrician or non-electrician for fixing um, EV charging stations. And that's pretty cool because as those more charging stations come on, there's going to be more and more. Because what are we expecting? To 10x the number of charging stations there are out there now.
Correct.
So,
Yes.
so I mean, there's obviously going to be a lot of opportunity. It's a you know when cars took over from horse and buggies, you had all kinds of people saying why cars weren't going to work. And the people weren't going to buy them. They're too expensive. There's all this other, and then Henry Ford came along and made them somewhat affordable, and he paid his employees enough that they could actually drive the cars. So that really helped popularize, Ford initially, and but you still had people holding out until like the 1930s, and now you can't find a damn horse.
That's right. But for a twist of fate, those early vehicles were electric as well. They had some electric vehicles
Oh
uh,
yes.
back, back in the day, and it could have gone either way. Yes.
Yeah, so it's funny because the first electric vehicles were created in I think like 1837 or something like that, and it was basically they took the horse off of the cart and just put in some kind of battery and were able to run an electric cart. But there wasn't places to charge it or anything like that because electricity wasn't really a thing even. That was
Yes.
really when electricity was first coming around, and there weren't opportunities for it there.
Indeed. Indeed.
All right, let's see. So this is kind of interesting today. I've had you can hear me okay, right?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Do you still see me?
Yes, I still see you.
Okay, because my screen is completely frozen up and it's really quite humorous. I'm going to my my system basically crashed here during the call, and I'm not really sure what it's trying to do, but it's not being very
Oh, now you froze.
there. I'm back. Sorry about
There
that.
you go. There you go. You froze for a minute there.
Yeah, oh, I didn't just freeze. My browser completely crashed, and
Oh,
I went on. I've not had. I'm not gonna say I've not ever had technical difficulties with the system, but they can happen. Anyways, I didn't really have any more questions for today, unless there's anything else you'd like to discuss.
no, to your listeners out there who are who are indeed advocates of electric vehicles, pass the word on. For the negative aspects of EV adoption, we need as many ambassadors for what we're doing, just to make it easy to create more jobs, and that's what Skill Fusion is about: creating more jobs in a really exciting electrification period.
No, I think that's great that you're at the forefront of education to so people can do that. I've seen other attempts at creating jobs. One of my friends is got a program that he wants to teach people how to convert ICE over to EV, and but he's thinking more not just classic cars, but also flood damaged cars,
Mm.
and taking out basically all of the parts that could have been damaged from the flood damage and redoing the car completely as an electric vehicle. And it has kind of an interesting, plan on how to train people to be able to do those kinds of things. Because obviously, there's a lot of things, you're gonna as we do this transition, you're not going to need oil change technicians as much. You're not going to need people who are doing brake jobs, transmission rebuilds. There's all these things that are going away. You're still going to need tires. You're still going to need place to wash your car. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so much maintenance that isn't going to be needed anymore as we go along into the future, that it really changes how things are going to go, and it's going to change the dynamics of the supply chain, because a lot of your companies that are currently making parts for the big three automakers aren't going to be as needed. You know,
mhm.
what is it? Tesla's the most vertically integrated of all car manufacturers, and they own so much of the supply chain of everything from battery production to making their own chassis, all these other things, that they're not buying parts from so many OEMs anymore. And that's kind of a
Mhm.
big threat to a lot of American industry because it's so different than how the big three have always operated.
Yes, yes,
And
absolutely. They're doing a great job. They're a great example, for a awesome business model in a growing technology.
well, Musk has definitely done a lot of things, I think, for the right reasons, and he's put his own fortune at risk doing it. But at the flip side, he's also had the benefit of being kind of they were the early they were the first ones to produce something nice for the people who were interested in being EV adopters and didn't want something that looked hideous.
Mhm.
And then at the same time, interest when they first started bringing the Model S to market, and particularly by the time the Model 3 came out, interest rates had gotten to a extremely low rate in the cycle, and so they had the benefit of when the Model 3 and the Model Y were released, that interest rates were insanely cheap and really helped spur sales. So
Yes,
right now, all your car manufacturers are hurt by the fact that interest rates are high, trying to stop inflation, right? And so that's one of the reasons why interest rates are so high, but it makes it hard for people, their consumers, to go out and buy a car. And so there's all of these things that have made it that have put the brakes on a lot of things. People always say, "Oh, the EV sales are declining or whatever." It's like, well, it slowed down, but interest rates went up. I mean, it didn't really help things. Anyways, Rue, it's been fun having you on here today,
thank you,
and
David.
I want to thank our listeners for watching. And please leave us comments. And I am going to go ahead and end the show for today. And